Eurydice is not disappearing. This actually feels like a James Bond movie. Oh. Don't record that. Enough of that. Okay, I'm gonna unplug this because you know me, I don't use slides. And I know that drives you crazy. Okay. Maybe you could. Oh, okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully we can finish before the time. Let's see. Okay, so today what I wanted to do was orient myself around this expression. It's on the quote document that I sent. It's on Canvas. I'm not sure how many of you received it. I don't know if it helps or if it hinders. Hopefully a little of both. But I wanted to orient myself around one of the quotes that's in that document. That was I extracted from a text that I think was a transcription of a speech that Jacques-Alain Miller gave in Brazil like 20 years ago. The quote is this: "What makes the unconscious exist as knowledge is love. Love is what can mediate between the ones all alone. What makes the unconscious exist as knowledge is love. Love is what can mediate between the ones all alone." Okay, I think it's a really difficult passage, obviously, so hold on to this quote, return to it in your head as I'm speaking, and maybe after I speak, if we post this lecture, you might want to return to it again, because what I want to try and do today is to elucidate its necessity. So already I'm returning to this word again. The word is necessity. And I understand it has some philosophical baggage, this word, necessity, the necessary, and so on. And I can't say with any degree of confidence that I'm aware of the philosophical baggage of how this concept has been used in the history of ideas, because I don't really know, to be honest. But last week, I tried to show how Lacan made use of this concept, along with another concept, contingency, necessity and contingency. But it occurred to me this week, because of another class that I'm involved in, that it was this concept, necessity, that was used to critique Descartes, who I talked about last week. Precisely, it was by David Hume in his Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. A necessary connection, a necessary relationship, a necessary connection can be inferred, he claimed, based upon, to put it really simply and naively, I admit, and imprecise, based upon custom. You can infer a necessary relationship or connection based upon custom. So for example, suppose that there's a ball, a billiard ball, ball A, and it's always, let's suppose there's ball B, billiard ball B, and it always moves after there's a movement of ball A, apparently hitting it. Well, there's a probability that it will do so again. We can expect that it will continue to do so. Every time ball A hits ball B, we can expect ball B to move. There will be an effect based on custom, which is repetition. Custom is based on repetition. So it's based upon the reoccurring impression that ball B has moved when it was hit by ball A in the past. You know, so what I'm imagining here as a psychoanalyst, I imagine every morning I wake up and beside me, call me person A, I bump into person B, who is my wife, who I see every morning. And And I expect with some probability that because I've seen her every morning in the past, I will continue to see her in the future. I will continue to bump into her every morning. In this way, I think it was, for Hume, who wasn't actually married, it was a way to convince himself that there is a relationship, a connection. What about contingency for Hume? Contingency, remember, it's a slip, an accident, a blunder, a mistake, something unplanned. It's contingent. Contingencies also have a way of repeating, as is customary. So, we keep making the same mistakes, and we keep making them over and over again. The same accidents keep happening. A contingency doesn't just happen once. So maybe we take comfort in Hume's principle of necessity, because we can expect with some probability that we will keep seeing the billiard balls hitting one another. But for Lacan, there's no comfort in the repetition of contingency by necessity. There's no comfort. So that's my initial thought. I know it's a little obscure, but I guess I'm just trying to get the ball rolling. So I also discussed Descartes last week. Why? The reason I was discussing Descartes last week was because I wanted to bring us to the point of admitting, I realize now it's not a radical statement, that we're no longer, or not exclusively, inhabitants of Descartes' world, of the Cartesian world. Okay, but now I realize it's not a revolutionary statement to say that. It's not radical at all, because this is what everybody already believes. We already critique Descartes. Everybody, the whole world, if there's such a thing, critiques Descartes. So we already agree that we're not in the Cartesian world in some sense today. The Cartesian walls no longer hold, they no longer offer support, and the world has come, the roof has come crashing down upon us, the Cartesian roof, the Cartesian coordinates. But I think we're less inclined to follow this to its obvious conclusion. Its obvious conclusion, put in a psychoanalytic language, it implies, I think, that the world doesn't exist, which means also that the big other doesn't exist, or that finally the unconscious doesn't exist. So, what do we do when the world doesn't exist anymore? I'll define this concept. Give me time, even though I know we don't have any. Last night, I was thinking about this fable. It's a really popular fable. Maybe you know it. It clearly left an impression upon me. It probably left an impression upon me because it's about a chicken, and I can't seem to stop thinking about chickens lately. I don't know why. It's like chickens are everywhere for me. It's a fable about Chicken Little, or it's also called Henny Penny, and it's been told in all kinds of different variations. I hope you've heard of it. By the way, maybe I can't stop talking about chickens, because for me, it's like the chicken doesn't exist, and that's what happens when something ceases to exist. You see it everywhere. You expect to see it everywhere. It appears everywhere. Okay, minor tangent. I was reminded of this because I'm currently reading a text by a Canadian author named Margaret Atwood, which I'll be teaching about her in another class in a few weeks. A text by her, a short story called Death by Landscape. What's really interesting in this text is that it's a story about a young girl who is going camping, and then something happens. They're up on a really high cliff, Lookout Point, I think it's called, and something happens. Her friend just disappears. It's horrific. And then we're brought to the future when she's an adult, the friend who witnessed the disappearance of this girl at this camp, and she sees the missing girl everywhere. She's missing, but she sees her missing everywhere. In paintings, landscape paintings in the woods, behind every rock, behind every tree, there she is. Her inexistence makes her appear everywhere. So she sees her everywhere precisely as missing. That's the thing that's hard to kind of wrap your head around. She's everywhere in her absence, behind the trees, behind the rocks, and so on. That's why when we talk about the concept of whole, H-O-L-E, it's not an emptiness. It's not like as we imagine something missing. I'm going to return to that point before I finish today. But what happened to Chicken Little? So an acorn fell on his head. I don't know, maybe he's sleeping, an acorn falls on his head. He's not expecting it. It's unplanned. It knocked him on the forehead, and he's instantly launched into a panic. He runs through the field screaming, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. In some versions, it's the world is falling, the world is falling. Doesn't matter, it means the same thing. First off, notice the repetition. The sky is falling, the sky is falling. Why does he repeat? Why does he say it twice, or she? It's also not a question. He didn't go, is the sky falling? He said, the sky is falling. It's a statement of certainty. It's very important too. But what is the lesson of the fable? Julie reminded me last night what fables were. They're supposed to be funny, and they're supposed to give you a moral lesson, I think is what you said, right? Well, I don't think the lesson is about mass hysteria, or it's not about like don't jump to quick judgments or conclusions. I don't think that's what the lesson is. It might appear like that's what the lesson is, but I don't think that's what it ultimately is. The fable's supposed to be humorous, which means it's a joke at the chicken's expense. Like, we know better than the chicken. We know the sky isn't falling. The chicken's delusional, he's crazy. So it begins with the presupposition that we know better than the chicken, because we believe the sky is not falling. Based on our experience, that's the impression that was left upon us by our experience of the world. So we have a different impression than the chicken, which means a different experience than the chicken. So it implies that if the chicken is delusional, crazy, psychotic, we're not. We're not psychotic, we're not delusional. We're not detached from reality. The chicken is detached from reality. I'm not convinced by either of these claims. I don't think the chicken was the idiot that we imagined him to be. He had the impression that his world was crashing down upon him. And maybe it was. Like, what hit him on the head ultimately? It was the real that hit him on the head. And its effect is no different than walking into a glass wall. It's the same effect. There's a story that's told by Lacan in his Écrit. I can't remember which writing it was, but I think it was Aggressivity and Psychoanalysis, or maybe it was the Mirror Stage essay. And it's often repeated. It's a story told, I'm going to tell it in my own way, about a child. Let's say a child is at school playing in the playground. The child punches another child. Child A punches child B. Child A cries. The teacher comes and says, "What happened?" This isn't a joke. It's not a joke. This really happens. There's no punchline here. Child A explains that it was he who was hit by child B. Okay, the facts in this case, they don't care about the child's feelings. They don't care about the little boy's feelings. We say, no, you hit child B. But what if child A isn't the liar that we think he is? He really thinks that he was hit by child B. It really happens. It's a real thing that we run into in the clinic all the time. You're hurting other people. You claim they're hurting you. Psychoanalysis teaches that the facts won't straighten things out, the empirical facts. The chicken persists, and no amount of reasoning will change his mind. The sky is falling. So what's my point? My point is that it's incorrect to claim that the chicken is detached from reality. It's clear to me, from the perspective of psychoanalysis, that the chicken actually has too much reality, too much of the real. This is the chicken's testimony. I have too much reality, I have too much of the real. That's what a statement of certainty says. I'm too in touch with reality. It's like when we talk about schizophrenics or psychotics being detached from reality, be very cautious about these statements. It's the problem with the standard definition that we have of psychosis or schizophrenia or schizophrenic delusions in psychiatry, psychology, and so on. You'll hear people claim, and these are clinicians, they'll say, for example, delusion implies, the measure of a delusion is that the person's detached from reality. Whose reality? What's the measure of reality in this case, you know? By this definition, it implies, if you bring the logic to its natural conclusion, it implies that we're all delusional. And we are. We're all delusional. The clinician, who's the person who's diagnosing psychotic delusions, is using his own measure of reality, his own impressions based on his experience, as a means through which to measure the impressions of his patient, the little chicken maybe. And so the clinician presumes with certainty, with some degree of certainty, that his reality is the correct one, that he has a grasp on reality. That's the trademark of a delusion. Like, that is the trademark of a delusion. Your clinician is delusional. We have like 100 years of humanities and social science scholarship to demonstrate that we're detached from reality, whether it's the field of linguistics or psychoanalysis or media theory, whatever it is, they all testify to the same thing. We don't have access to the referent out there in reality. We're detached. So the testimony of psychosis, I mean, the psychoanalyst, if he or she believes that they're not detached from reality, this is the delusional statement par excellence. The testimony of psychosis, of delusional psychosis, it's always one of certainty. I know with certainty. I see reality clearly. I'm certain about it. There really are messages being sent to me through my television screen from Osama bin Laden. No amount of reasoning will change this person's mind. So let's exercise some caution when we claim that the chicken's delusional or suffering from mass hysteria or whatever. He's clearly in a panic, though, which means has some acute anxiety. By the way, I used to suffer from panic attacks when I was younger, like really intense panic attacks, even throughout university. And I remember very clearly how difficult it was for me to speak well about my panic. I couldn't find the words. I couldn't speak about my experience. It left an impression upon me, certainly, but I couldn't speak about my experiences. It didn't mean that I didn't have an impression of them. Impression is a Humean word, in case you're not seeing the way I'm playing with language a bit. It just meant that language didn't offer me the material through which to express the panic in such a way that it could be understood by other people so that they could share in my experience. Love is usually like this, real love in some sense. You know, we'll say, oh, my feelings are too much. I have too much feelings. Words cannot describe. You know, words will even pollute the experience of my love for you. I can't even explain to you how much I love. Words fail the experience. So all words pale in comparison to the experience. I couldn't express anything about my panic attacks. You should know about this because in Russian literature, you have a very clear testimony of something like this happening. It was Anton Chekhov. You know Chekhov? He wrote a short little obscure essay titled Panic Fears, which Lacan discusses in passing in his seminar on anxiety. You should read it because Chekhov provides this testimony of his experience of panic attacks, acute anxiety. And it's clear that he infers no causation whatsoever. He cannot find ball A that hit ball B. He just knows that ball B was moved, that there was an effect. And he knows that it's an effect that repeats because he described at least 3 moments when he suffered from this panic. It repeats. So there's custom involved. I remember when people would try to talk to me about my panic attacks, and they would say, I understand you, I also have panic attacks, you know, I suffer from a panic disorder too, and these sorts of things. They were trying to be empathetic, but I took it as a measure of their sincerity over whether or not I could bond with them. If they claimed they understood my panic attacks, I could not bond with them. It's like if you claim you have reasons to be in love, you are not in love. If they claimed they understood, I immediately concluded that we had nothing in common here. Because if they understood, they knew they could not communicate anything about that experience. They knew it could not be intelligible. They would know this. Maybe what they suffered from it was anxiety. You can speak about anxiety. When it comes to acute anxiety, which I would call anxiety qua anxiety, anxiety as such, the real panic, trauma, there's no words. Words fail. The experience is raw, it's real, it's undeniable. Lacan, in his seminar. I know you know this because Julie is the one who keeps reminding me of it in her lectures. It's a really important thing that Lacan says. Anxiety is the only affect, I didn't say effect, but it's close, the only affect that doesn't deceive, that doesn't lie, which means that it introduces an experience that leaves you with the impression of not being duped, of not being deceived. That's why we can claim the chicken wasn't an idiot. That was his problem. He wasn't an idiot, but he still wasn't prepared to be stupid enough to build a world for himself, to protect himself in some sense. That's what led to the chicken's self-destruction in the fable, as we'll see. I want to take a moment to return to a point that was made by Slavoj Zizek that I repeat a lot lately because I stumbled upon it last quarter. Slavoj Zizek discovered this fascinating point about the former American Secretary of Defense under President George W. Bush. His name's Donald Rumsfeld. I'm sure you know it. It's popularly known that Rumsfeld was seeking a justification for the war in Iraq at the time. And to justify it, he constructed this piece of American propaganda, a really curious classification system. He claimed that there are 3 different types of knowledge that Americans had about there being possible weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Okay, let's go through them. Number 1, there are what he called the known knowns. Known knowns, the things we know. Like, there are students in this classroom and 2 professors who think of themselves as students. I know this, and I know that I know this. I'm perfectly conscious of the fact that there are people in this room. There's no deception here. I'm not a dupe. That's number 1. There are known knowns. Number 2, there are known unknowns, which means I know the limitations of my knowledge. The things we know that we don't know, like there are people walking around the block right now. I know that there are people walking around the block, but I don't know how many there are. But I know that I don't know how many there are. I'm perfectly conscious of the fact that I don't know how many people are walking around. So we have known knowns, we have known unknowns. The third one, justification for the war in Iraq. Unknown unknowns. Unknown unknowns. The things we don't even know we don't know. Okay, this is the justification for the war in Iraq. We don't even know what we don't know about the weapons, possible weapons of mass destruction. We don't know what they could be, where they could be hidden. We don't know what horrors, what terrors await us in Iraq, what terror is being prepared there. So this was the classification system. What was Slavoj's point? He said there's a 4th one missing. We have known knowns, we have known unknowns, and we have unknown knowns. It was the discovery of psychoanalysis, the 4th one. The unknown knowns. Known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, unknown knowns. The knowledge of which we do not know we know. Unconscious suppositions, unconscious knowledge, tacit knowledge that determines us. So it's what I call in this course, the idiot's knowledge. The idiot's knowledge. It's the knowledge of the idiot, what I've been calling an idiot. Like, it's knowledge that determines us, that we suppose, but we don't know that it's determining us, that it's supposed by us. We're ignorant of it. We're idiots. So it's what I'm tempted to, well, Zizek calls it ideology. I'm tempted to call it idiotology. It's idiotology. It works for us. So, but here's the point. Slavoj missed something really important here, I think, extremely important. When I heard Rumsfeld's speech about the war in Iraq, according to Rumsfeld's old logic, the unknown knowns, field of the unconscious, knowledge, and so on, it's missing. There are no tacit presuppositions in any of Rumsfeld's thoughts or anything he has to say about the war in Iraq. They're missing. The unknown knowns are missing. They're not even implicit. He doesn't make a slip of the tongue, a blunder. There's no accidents there, and so on. It implies that the unconscious wasn't operative there, despite what Slavoj has to say. He wasn't determined by an idiot's knowledge, Rumsfeld. Instead, what did Rumsfeld do? He ran like a chicken with his head cut off through the fields, screaming in panic, Saddam Hussein might make the world crash down upon us. You know, he knows very well it was real for him. How do I put it? Like, it's just as real for him as an acorn that hits you in the head, or an airplane that crashes into a tower on September 11th. You know, there's no connection between the planes hitting the towers on 9/11 and the war in Iraq. But for Saddam Hussein, there was a necessary relationship between the two of them. He actually believed that there was a connection. It's a strange connection because we can't see from my world, I don't see a connection between those two events. He had nothing to do with Osama bin Laden, as far as I can tell. But there's no point trying to reason with Rumsfeld, trying to convince him of it. He was sold to his logic. He had no doubts. He was absolutely certain. From the very beginning, he was certain. He didn't even have any evidence at all, but he was certain. He was certain there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but the evidence was missing. But precisely because it was missing, he saw it everywhere with certainty. The known knowns, the certainties, they exist against the backdrop of the terrifying dark hole of in knowledge, the hole that is the unknown unknowns. That's what propelled him. It was because there were unknown unknowns that he was so certain of the known knowns. This is the point. It's not ideology. It's not ideology. Rumsfeld was certain because the evidence was missing. The missing weapons of mass destruction themselves were missing. He saw them behind every rock, behind every tree, and saw them so on with certainty. It was just obvious that they existed. And these are the sorts of delusions that lead us to war, which we're in right now. I beg you to think about this in relation to what's happening in Ukraine. But Rumsfeld wasn't an idiot. I actually was thinking there's very few idiots today. The problem is that there's even fewer stupid people. Certainties exist against the whole of the unconscious, when the unconscious ceases to exist. So I was asking myself a question earlier today. Where does this concept of the real ultimately lead us within psychoanalysis? Where does it lead us? I think it leads us necessarily toward the formulation of the inexistence of the big other, which also means the inexistence of social relationships, as we heard from Julie's lecture, and also the inexistence of the unconscious. It means that there's a certainty of knowledge which is fixed, not determinative, but necessary. And I was thinking that the best lesson we have in recent culture is perhaps in this popular Netflix documentary that we heard about earlier today, Don't Look Up. I hope you've seen it. If you haven't, please go watch it. You have to watch it. And the reason I'm asking you to watch it is not because I'm trying to convert you to be like a liberal scientist type, you know, who believes in science and so on. I'm not trying to turn you all into scientists. In fact, I don't think the film is doing that to anybody. I don't think it's converting anybody to the perspective of science, despite what many people believe. It's not changing anybody's opinion. The message of the film, it seems to me, is just echoing around in the walls of the rooms occupied by those who are already prepared to hear its message. So it's not a movie about the dangers of scientific ignorance, I don't think. The film is even more tragic. When the world comes crashing down, we confront fundamentally the fact that we are all alone. Lacan's concept was the one all alone. All one word. It's found in the quote that I'm trying to orient myself around today. It's an experience that makes some people panic, some people scream, maybe some people cry. It can lead to all kinds of different affects. And that's precisely what it did in the film. They were screaming at the top of their lungs at other people, trying to reason with them. Why don't you see what I see empirically? It's an insular film. It's a film about insularity, and it's a film about loneliness. The film is not about the coming collapse of the world. Sorry if this is a spoiler alert, but the spoilers are already out there. The sky's not falling. Okay, the sky is not falling. It already fell. That's the point. The world has already ended. We never had a world. We never had this world to begin with. The world never existed even before the asteroid came crashing down onto Earth in the film. It explains why the film opens in this dark room with a couple people who are in their lonely little small, I don't know, like scientific fraternity, isolated from the rest of the world in their cave. It's also how it ends. In a lonely small room, isolated from the rest of the world, nobody listens. It begins and ends in the same place. And when in the film they started running like chickens with their heads cut off, screaming that the sky's falling, trying to warn everybody, they didn't realize the tragedy already happened. They were just living the consequences of it. You know, they're trying to warn everybody, but it already happened. In fact, the belief that the tragedy is coming in the near future, an asteroid is going to come and hit the Earth, this is a comfort mechanism. It's a positive project. Why? Because it protects us from a much more primordial trauma or form of reasoning. We're already dead. The world never existed. We're already living the post-apocalypse. The apocalypse is not in the future. Like it's a history lesson. The film is a history lesson. We're like these, you know, those Looney Tune characters who run off the edge and they float there and they don't know that they've already lost the ground beneath their feet. This is where we are. So whether it's an acorn, a glass wall, an asteroid, whatever it is, we're already, because of this, we're already in this field of the one, all alone in this lonely era. And it's not clear to me, at least, that science is going to uphold the world for us or reconstruct the world for us, bring us together. We try in desperation, but what we notice from the pandemic that we're in right now, I think, is precisely that science has not and is not capable of offering us an all, a universal, a world, a social bond. It's actually found itself more and more, the scientists more and more alone in their isolated worlds, confronting the irresolvable tensions with others who don't share their world. And we can laugh, like people are laughing at the truck drivers' protests right now in Canada. I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on with the protests in Canada. We can laugh at them. Personally, I don't agree with them necessarily, but we can laugh at them. Like we can laugh at them like we laugh at Chicken Little, or we can laugh at the nurses who are saying, for example, like vaccines save lives. We can laugh at them, but it doesn't change the fact that the world doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. Science, empirical science, which refers to experience and leaves an impression, perhaps a different one today than it did in Hume's day, but it always inevitably confronts the whole, the real. By the way, don't look up. That could have been the title of the Chicken Little fable. It could have been the moral. What happens is the whole inevitably swallows the world. We're destroyed. The scientists hold hands in their lonely little social world, holding hands around what? Their shared scientific certainty. They keep telling people to trust the impressions of their experience. Look up, see for yourself that the end of the world is real, and you'll have the same impression as us. And then what happened? The world ended anyway. So it all ends. It's like a giant chicken gobbled them up. Time stops, they fall into eternity, and there's nothing left to hold it all together. So what is the whole? The whole is not lack. Oh my God, I only have 7 minutes. Time stops and we fall into eternity. I have so much more to say. The whole is not lack. It's not lack exactly. It's not something missing within the world. That's the paradox of the whole. It's not something missing. It's not something negative. The problem is that the whole is not negative. It's too positive. The whole is a positive project. It's like a cup that runneth over. It overflows. There's a too muchness to it. Ellie Ragland, psychoanalyst, put it like this, I quote her: Lacan taught that loss, in terms of the whole, is not an empty negative void. It's positivized by the jouissance, new word, that catalyzes repetitious acts whose purpose is to close out loss by anchoring its certainty to a sure thing, end quote. So the whole is positively charged. That's the problem. It's positivized jouissance, positivized anxiety. That's what panic is. It's a too muchness, too much for words. And it's anchored by the certainty of a sure thing. And we see this sure thing expressed in the penultimate moment of the film. Right before the whole devours them, what do they say? They don't say we're about to lose everything. They're holding hands and they're saying, we really had it all, didn't we? That's what the last message of the film is. We had it all, which means they had too much. It's not a film about loss. It's a statement of melancholia. That's the melancholic statement par excellence. It means that nothing is missing, not even loss itself. Lack was lacking. So maybe the chicken didn't go far enough. You know, the chicken was destroyed at the end of the fable. He should have nourished his stupidity. If you don't nourish your stupidity, it leads, well, how did Lacan put it? He said, when we talk about jouissance, it begins with, I'm quoting him, it begins with a tickle and it ends in a blaze of petrol. And when I think of this expression, begins with a tickle, ends in a blaze of petrol, I imagine immediately these monks who go out in the streets and protest, pour gasoline on themselves and light themselves on fire. It's no different than, let's say, an anarchist who begins by standing in front of a line of police, and then the bank and the police cars are on fire, and he's got 20 years in prison. It begins with a tickle. It ends in a blaze of petrol. Chicken Little, it ended in a cave where he was eaten by a fox. The fox was the only one who would listen to him, who shared his delusion. The fox basically said, okay, I believe you, the sky is falling, come with me, we need to do something about it, come into my cave. And then he devours the fox as if he were a seed. So it ends in a blaze of petrol. By the way, I was reminded that last week I was talking about the Little Prince, the story of the Little Prince. And you know, the fox and the Little Prince, the Little Prince is a devotional story about how, you know, you're responsible when you're in love for that which you tame. In the fable, there's no love. So the fox takes on a different path. The fox led the little chicken to a cave where he was eaten up. So what is a world? Oh God. A world is the support of existence. That's what I'm led to believe based off of what I've been saying in this lecture. It might not be true in other philosophical works or whatever, but that's what I'm led to as a conclusion. A world is the support of existence. And I think that there are more than enough idiots to confirm this claim, idiots who suppose that they live in a shared world with one another. A world is the support of existence with all of the resonance that the word existence produces. Descartes only existed because of the world within which he found himself. It was a world with walls, and those walls echoed, and they echoed throughout his meditations. I think, therefore I am. He thinks twice. He repeats the I of the statement. I think, therefore I am. His existence was supported by this echo of the I that thinks twice. It depended upon the echo. But psychoanalysis necessitates a different world. I don't think it implies that we go around breaking down the walls of all of the temples, the Christian temples, and so on. But it simply puts forward the following, based on its own unique experience. When we bump our heads on the real, on inexistence, the world seems to fall away. There's no support. There's a loss. But what's lost? What's lost is the very space of loss. That's the point. We lose the space of loss itself. And it's what I was led to discover last week when I was talking about religion, because what I found was that each religion, like each civilization, like each social bond, it makes use of loss. the loss of belief, the loss of ideology, the loss of fantasy, the loss of knowledge, precisely to uphold their world. When the walls of the temple are demolished, when the whole thing comes crashing down, you also lose the space of loss. That's why it's only natural that you feel depressed when you lose your world. Please just give me a couple more minutes. I'm going to try and tie it up. You might also feel depressed at the end of your psychoanalysis. Like maybe after 10 to 15 years of psychoanalysis, suddenly you're in the most intense depression of your life. That's the victory of psychoanalysis. It's true. You lose your world. You're left with the experience of the loss of your world, and that's depression. It's the victory of psychoanalysis. You're right to be depressed because you're not an idiot anymore. It leaves an impression on you that's maybe something of a necessary relation, but not Hume's necessary relation. It leaves the impression of a contingency that's necessary. So you're in this depressive position, characterized more by melancholia than mourning. But it implies this additional step, I claim. You have to be stupid. You have to find some support in the world. You have to discover the stupidity that's necessary to live in a world organized by necessary relations around your stupidity, which before, I mean, it involves something of invention, and maybe I can return to that in the future, but otherwise you're gonna end up being set ablaze in petrol. So maybe that's a formula for me. Analysis makes idiots want to be stupid. Makes idiots want to be stupid enough to invent a world for themselves. I'm almost done, I promise. So it leads toward the invention of a social bond within the experience of melancholia. That's why at the end of analysis, your psychoanalyst gets cast off, gets rejected. You spit the psychoanalyst out. You say, I don't need you anymore. I don't share a world with you anymore. I don't need my psychoanalyst to help me anymore. I don't need your support. Because you're no longer subjected to idiotology. So the love affair with your analyst is over. It's time for divorce. And I claim that real love locates a support for itself there after the divorce. Even Freud says something like this. I'm gonna have to go and find it. He says, you know, really good marriages tend to happen after you've already had a divorce. So I recommend everybody gets divorced at least once. A good marriage probably depends upon it. But marriage, again, it's a social bond, right? So that's why I opened today's lecture with a statement that seemed psychoanalytic, but was also deeply sociological, because it's sociological precisely because it's psychoanalytic. The unconscious is the place of the social bond, of the big other, without which we're all alone, without a world to support it. Love makes the unconscious exist again for the one all alone. And I just want to end with this thought, and I know we're 2 minutes at the end. It's a question of existence. Where does the unconscious go at the end of psychoanalysis? It's a question of existence. Existence, the new concept, existence, which is a concept from Lacan. What remains is a repetition after the world falls away. Something keeps repeating. The prefix, I'm trying to be really quick, exit from existence is really important because it means to exit, to transgress beyond the walls of the world. So I want to end with this quote from Jacques-Alain Miller. Quote, to grasp what existence is about, one must ask oneself what it means to exit. Existence, which became a category of the last teaching of Lacan, is what, strictly speaking, qualifies the real. To make a social link from without law, outside. Existence means that we're no longer there, that you cross a limit, go beyond a threshold, and that consequently you pass into another space, another dimension. It means bye-bye, end quote. And I think it's really important because what I want to do, and I'll end with this thought, what I want to do in the fourth quarter, hopefully, is begin here. I think this is why psychoanalysis is ultimately an anarchist social bond. There's something anarchist about it because it's the only social bond that currently exists without the law. That's Russell. Thanks.